twos. But there's only one two.
This weekend, KTVU marks its 50th anniversary. We went on the air for the first time on March 2nd, 1958. When we marked our 40th anniversary 10 years ago, KTVU's Bob Shaw brought us a series of stories on the 10 o'clock news looking back. Tonight, we revisit our past. Here is Bob Shaw.
In many ways, the history of Channel 2 is the history of television itself, of how broadcasters have had to evolve decade by decade to keep you watching us.
Look, up in the sky, it's a bird.
It's a plane.
On March 2nd, 1958, KTVU first signed on the air from its studio in the abandoned Paris Theater in downtown Oakland. 4 months later, the station moved to this building in Jack London Square. Constructed cheaply by the Port of Oakland out of material gathered from a demolished pier, the facility was hardly state-of-the-art. In those days, our live broadcasts were regularly interrupted by rumbling trains, boat whistles, and foghorns. Channel 2 was the Bay Area's first independent television station. Channels 4, 5, and 7 were affiliated with national networks NBC, CBS, and ABC, which supplied most of their programs. To receive those shows, all they had to do was flip a switch, but KTVU had to program, create, or acquire its entire broadcast day. Early on, you could always turn to Channel 2 to see live broadcasts of wrestling and roller derby. Of course, we couldn't create original shows all day long, so we bought programs from studios and syndicators. Programs like The Jack LaLanne Show, which had to be one of the cheapest half hours of television ever filmed. A curtain, a couple of chairs, one camera, no edits, and Jack with an off-screen organist.
1, 2, 3, beginner stop.
Old Roy Rogers and Gene Autry feature films were re-edited and turned into one-hour television shows. But for the first 30 years of KTVU's existence, the most popular programs, by far, were reruns of network shows that had already been seen on the other Bay Area stations.
I shudder to think of what would happen if you knew that you were watching.
Like today, the most popular genres were dramas.
You will know him as The Fugitive.
Detective shows.
Never box with senior citizens. Burke's Law.
And half-hour sitcoms.
Laverne and Shirley, weeknights at 6:30. On Channel 2, there's only one two.
Of the hundreds of off-network programs we ran, there were 2 success stories in the late 60s that foretold the bright future of KTVU and independent stations across the country. When we acquired I Love Lucy in 1968, the show had been rerunning for more than a decade on CBS. In fact, the network was still showing it in the morning when we began running it at night. But the program was a huge hit for us, and we televised it virtually non-stop for 25 years.
That's it.
Outpost 2 coming into sensor range, Captain.
Then there's Star Trek. During its first year on NBC, we agreed to broadcast reruns as soon as the show was canceled. We didn't have to wait long. After weak ratings over 3 network seasons, the program landed on our doorstep in 1969. Before long, the repeats developed a fanatical cult following, and the audience built from year to year. Amazing, considering that, due to its short network run, there were only 79 episodes of the show.
People don't care how many times they see it. I mean, with Star Trek, if you strip it, if you run it Monday through Friday, you're going to see repeats every 4 months. But they don't care.
This is Starfleet Command. You can't miss it, because there's only one, two.
Within 2 years of our 1958 sign-on, we were broadcasting films, shows, and specials in color. This at a time when ABC and CBS were almost entirely black and white. But we were only able to do so because some forward-thinking suppliers in the 50s spent the extra money to film their productions in color. They were the innovators. We weren't. Most of our programs were reruns of canceled network shows. Still, we weren't complaining. In the 60s and 70s, we made a lot of money with repeats.
The ship's aground on the shore of this uncharted desert isle.
Oddly enough, a number of shows became more popular in reruns than they were on the network. A lot of viewers didn't discover programs like Gilligan's Island or The Odd Couple until they appeared on Channel 2. In the early days, we pretty much had our pick of available shows, but as the years progressed, we had to compete with 3 new Bay Area independent stations, channels 20, 44, and 36. So, we decided to break away from the pack.
There's only one tune.
We started to pursue as much original programming as possible.
We thought first-run shows would be more appealing than the 87th run of the old black and white sitcoms.
We were the first station in the Bay Area to run the Phil Donahue Show, back when it was the only program of its kind on the air.
We picked up Donahue, and nobody else in the market had room for it or didn't want it. It struggled for a long time. A lot of people didn't know what it was or why, they wanted to see I Love Lucy, and they didn't care about Donahue.
Then we discovered the Bay Area's appetite for British productions and nature specials.
Upstairs, downstairs.
He's going to bring her back. Oh, mercy God.
We ran Six Wives of Henry VIII and a lot of National Geographic specials, and enormously successful for us.
The Wild Dogs of Africa, the Wednesday night special at 8 on Channel 2.
Originals such as Dance Fever, Solid Gold, and Star Search had surprisingly long runs, but our biggest hits, the shows that really kicked KTVU into the big time, were, ironically, those same off-network reruns we were trying to get away from.
Join us this fall, right here on Channel 2.
We made so much money on MASH in those early days that we built a new building.
That's why they called KTVU the house that MASH built. Just how successful was MASH? Shattering a precedent, Channel 2 ran it twice each night, and the ratings were so high, the program paid for itself with the proceeds from just one commercial. Every other commercial was gravy.
I have never been witness to such a silly, soft...
Cheers was almost as successful, and currently Seinfeld is one of our most popular shows. The reason? All of these sitcoms followed the same pattern. In their early network years, their ratings were so low they were almost canceled. It took years, but each of them became the #1 show on television, by which point KTVU was televising their reruns. Since most of the show's fans had not seen the early episodes, Channel 2 reaped the rewards.
What's your theory as to why Cheers was one of the most popular shows of all time?
Beats me, good writing, fun characters.
Bunch of losers who can't make it on their own. There's something appealing.
Every character is like, the rabbit that doesn't get the tricks. Each in his own way, just when they about win, they don't. Just when they about grasp something, they don't. So people can identify with that.
Still to come on A Second Look, we remember Captain Satellite, Charlie and Humphrey, and the era of live children's television shows.
KTVU, Oakland, San Francisco.
On this 50th anniversary of KTVU going on the air, we're bringing you stories we aired 10 years ago on our 40th anniversary. Here again is Bob Shaw.
Here's the Walter Crankcase of the animal news world, Mr. Charles Horse.
If you grew up in the Bay Area during the 60s, chances are this dog and pony show was one of your favorites. Charlie, Humphrey, and their human partner, Pat McCormick, first appeared locally on Channel 7 in 1961. After 5 years, the trio moved to Channel 2, hosting cartoons and Three Stooges episodes, to the delight of children and more than a few adults.
Charlie and Humphrey would get fired a lot because the demographics would be wrong. We'd get high school kids and college kids and adults watching, and they were trying to sell, Kellogg cornflakes and Slinkies and stuff.
Charlie and Humphrey had the personality traits of classic comedy teams of the past. Charlie was smart and logical, the one who knew the difference between right and wrong. Humphrey was naive, impetuous, and stubborn, always in trouble, needing the advice and guidance of Charlie whether he wanted it or not. Needless to say, as kids we all identified with Humphrey.
Well, then what do you expect me to do? Go snitch one? No, that's against the law. Immoral, unethical, and you're a bad boy if you even think about it. Then what do I do?
I believed in Humphrey. I felt that he had an inner life. You weren't just a guy doing a puppet voice, and I love that.
The Charlie and Humphrey Show was one of the longest-running live entertainment programs in the history of Bay Area television. Some kids who first watched in grammar school were married with children by the time it ended.
I remember specifically sitting with my brother and sister once Charlie and Humphrey were doing a riff on a Leave It to Beaver commercial that was playing constantly on KTVU at the time. And Charlie and Humphrey just kept going over, pull yourself up, Whitey, put your foot on the lady's thumb. Pat McCormick was underneath whatever he was, making Charlie and Humphrey talk with his hands. And the three of us still remember that afternoon, the uncontrollable laughter that never ever stops.
This is Captain Satellite calling Space Tower. Stand by.
Channel 2's first kids show host was Captain Satellite. The captain was portrayed by Bob March, a licensed pilot and NASA buff. His crew featured viewers lucky enough to make the cut. Like most hosts of the era, Captain Satellite played cartoons, interviewed guests, and pitched products for his sponsors.
If you have any picky eaters, be sure they get Chocs.
But March's interest in the space program made the show more informational than his competitors.
The original 7 astronauts were guests on the Captain Satellite show. I wanted to combine entertainment with education.
March didn't just host the show, he created it, designed the sets, and developed his own costumes.
This was an early costume. Later on it evolved into a jumpsuit.
And Captain Satellite's rocket evolved into a flying saucer.
Hi, Captain Satellite aboard the Laser 2.
This live, hour-long show was so popular, it expanded to 90 minutes in 1965.
My show was the first show that McDonald's used to advertise in Northern California. And I made some personal appearances at McDonald's stores, and thousands of kids would come. They were mightily impressed.
But with the finite number of cartoons available and the proliferation of children's shows, competition for popular cartoons became fierce.
Here's some exciting scenes from the all-new Space Giants.
I want the Earth, and you shall not stop me.
I will stop you, Rodak.
We shall see.
As the cost of programming escalated, hosted kids shows became less profitable for stations, and in the late 60s, the government dealt the final blow.
The biggest cause of the demise, I think it was the FCC or one of those bureaucratic organizations, decreed that kid show hosts could no longer do live commercials. And as much as anything, that was the death knell for, because we didn't get paid lots of money, but we made lots of money on commercials.
One by one, locally produced kid shows disappeared.
I'm going to miss you guys.
Well, we're going to miss you too, Captain Satellite.
Bye-bye. Bye, Bonds. Or as they say in Louisiana. Yeah. Bye, you. Get up.
I'm looking for you now in my magic mirror. Romper Bumper, Stomper Boo.
These people played an important role in the pioneering years of television and meant a lot to Bay Area children. They entertained us, spoke to our concerns, and taught us a few lessons along the way, the most painful of which was nothing lasts forever, and acceptance of that is part of growing up.
When we come back on A Second Look, if you know the phrase, the count and the amount, then you probably remember dialing for dollars. That and who's that man behind the big cigar? Looking back at Bob Wilkins and Creature Features.
There's only one tune.
Over the years, 2 of the most popular shows on KTVU were produced right here in our own studios, Dialing for Dollars and Creature Features. And that's the focus of this next segment. Here again is Bob Shaw.
Hi, everybody. I'm Pat McCormick. Every day here on Channel 2, every weekday that is, at 12:30, we have what we call our Dialing for Dollars movie.
Dialing for Dollars was a Channel 2 institution for 23 years. Mel Venter started the show in 1967. A few years later, Pat McCormick took over, delivering afternoon movies and the promise of cash.
Congratulations to you.
The jackpots weren't huge.
A nice, fat $200.
But each day, thousands of viewers stayed glued to the tube, expecting Pat to call them any second.
I could never understand why people would come up to me and say, you know, with real aggravation, I've watched you for 9 years. Why haven't you called me? Because there's 5.5 million people to call. Wake up.
Dialing for Dollars was so popular, for a while it ran twice a day. The morning version was hosted by former Captain Satellite, Bob March.
We ain't gonna move.
We've got to move to one of those 9 Bay Area counties and get our phone listed in one of those phones so that Dialing for Dollars can call us.
Even though Dialing for Dollars ran some good pictures, the phone calls took time, so the films were often heavily edited. If you were a movie fan, it wasn't the best place to watch them, but KTVU gave you plenty of film-friendly venues for viewing the classics. Before cable TV and video players, there were only two places to watch movies, in theaters or on television. And in the 70s and early 80s, KTVU was the best place to watch movies on TV.
That was the one thing that kind of set the independent stations apart from the affiliates in those days. We presented a movie every night. We were the movie station.
We ran the most movies, up to 20 or more a week, and we ran the best movies.
The Odd Couple.
But what really set us apart from the other stations was the way we ran the movies.
Our whole image was centered around being a movie station, having the best prints, the best editing.
Channel 2 was the first station to commit extra time, money, and manpower to ensure our film presentations would be free of the scratches, splices, and color problems often seen elsewhere.
The normal feature that would come in here would be rejected out of hand.
Of course, not all of the 1,700 films in the Channel 2 library were four-star classics, but KTVU gave you a good excuse to watch even the worst movies.
We had to play Jesse James Meets Frankenstein's Daughter and Billy the Kid versus Dracula. We had to play those both on the same night.
Some of the worst movies ever made appeared on the late-night program Creature Features, but viewers would watch them over and over again to see what host Bob Wilkins would say next.
Target Earth is a story about a robot, an army of robots from Venus. And of course, Switzerland, known for their watches, and Venus has always been known for their robots.
Through the years, Bob Wilkins entertained and inspired countless viewers, including a young Modesto fan by the name of George Lucas, who sent us a token of his appreciation to give to Bob.
Wow. I just wanted you to know how much I enjoy watching Creature Features over the years, and you were a big part of the experience. Congratulations, George Lucas from old San Rafael over there, Lucasfilms. Whatever happened to George?
I have no idea.
Oh, this is really nice.
Wilkins hosted Creature Features from 1971 to 1979. After seeing far too many killer plants, crawling hands, and enemies from space, he turned the show over to John Stanley. The movies didn't get any better, but the caliber of guests improved.
Well, I've been very grateful to have the opportunity to do all that work.
It's a nostalgic memory of growing up, watching Channel 2 on Saturday nights, watching a horror film with mom and dad, brother and sister, and hiding under the covers if it terrifies them. Tonight at 11:30, right after the rock show.
Creature Features was canceled in 1984, partly because obtaining films, good or bad, was getting more difficult for broadcasters like us due to cable movie channels that were eating up product. Channel 2's days as the movie station were numbered, and the most radical step in its evolution was about to begin.
When we come back on A Second Look, from independent to Fox affiliate, what the change meant for KTVU.
There's only one, two.
One of the biggest transitions in the 50-year history of KTVU was the change from an independent station to a Fox network affiliate. And that's the focus of this final segment. Here is Bob Shaw.
In the mid-'80s, Fox offered KTVU the opportunity to become an affiliate of a new network. Original programming, the clout of a large group of stations, national presence. You'd think the decision would be easy.
It was a tough decision. I remember at the time there was a lot of analyzing on should we or shouldn't we.
When we were approached by Fox, it just made sense to me to give it a try, because we could always get out of the contract if it didn't work.
You're watching Fox.
For 3 decades, no one had attempted to launch a new broadcast network. But in 1987, Fox began its first night of primetime programming. One of its original shows was Married with Children.
I think when Married with Children hit on Sunday night, it was such a huge mega hit. I think that really gave a lot of legitimacy to the network.
Married with Children was encouraging, but starting a network from scratch was hugely difficult, and a lot of Fox's early shows didn't just die, they committed suicide.
Oh, this swimsuit makes me look like such a cow.
I've had burgers that weighed more than her.
I don't know if you remember Beans Baxter and Mr. President, and there were a lot of questionable shows, and they struggled for a long time.
No, there was never a point where we were going to bail. Now, it's interesting you said it, because there were some stations early on that did bail. All the Chris Griff stations, as an example. And that was a huge mistake.
As the network added additional nights and discovered what its audience wanted, more and more hits emerged on its schedule.
Brenda, does he know you're in high school? I told him I go to UCLA.
Shows like Beverly Hills 90210 and Melrose Place. Fox discovered a lot of talent, and as the network moved from struggle to success, so did many of its stars. Johnny Depp received early exposure on 21 Jump Street. Before Friends, Jennifer Aniston co-starred on a Fox comedy show called The Edge.
We could cook for them!
Yeah! What we cook?
Oh, there's no food here.
And Martin Lawrence vaulted to movie stardom after his hit show, Martin.
No, Martin, don't do this, don't do that!
But no single program has ever created more film stars than In Living Color. Keenan Ivory Wayans, Damon Wayans, Shawn Wayans, Marlon Wayans, Tommy Davidson, David Alan Grier, Jamie Foxx, and Jim Carrey have all found work in feature films.
Go away.
Married with Children eventually went on to become one of the longest-running sitcoms on television, and Fox began premiering additional shows that were huge hits from their very first episodes. Shows like The X-Files and Ally McBeal. The most groundbreaking success may be The Simpsons, which began as 2-minute filler material in Fox's failed skit program, The Tracy Ullman Show.
There should be a time for communication.
That's a good idea, dear. Bart, turn on the TV.
Now in its 12th year, Fox is a major player in broadcasting. But the network benefits as much from KTVU as KTVU benefits from Fox. Because, as our management likes to point out, unlike many other Fox affiliates, Channel 2 has always been a strong and powerful station.
This is a rather shameless promotion.
Hey, it worked on me.
Me too.
And that's it for this week's Second Look. I'm Julie Hayner. Thank you for watching.
There are twos, and there are twos, but there's only one